I was thinking about it, it's like, what is my legacy to my kids? And I when I was thinking about the game, I was like, well, this is nearly 40 years of development, and this is something that I can pass on to them, and it's something that they can hold in their hands and say, this is something that Dad did, and that's relatable. And so yeah, I have thought about that. That in a way, regardless of the other things that I've done in my life, that this is a reflection of my life in many ways, and it is my legacy.
Hi, welcome to the Dieku Podcast. I am Gary Snow, and with me is Jason Oberman, who is the author and creator of 6083, which is the sci-fi military role-playing game that is over 30 years in the making, almost 40 years in the making. Yeah. And Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so, as I hinted at, I mean, you have been developing this game for over 30 years, almost 40 years now. And yep. I really want to learn more about your process and how it got to this point. So maybe we can just dive right back into that and just tell us a little bit about your past, and maybe start off with growing up in Alaska.
Okay. Well, I think that growing up in Alaska is really key to that, because I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and so no game stores. The closest game store was, 80 miles away, but only accessible by boat or airplane because we didn't have a road out to where we live.
What part of Alaska were you in?
It's a little town called Squentina, and if you follow the Iditarod race, it is one of the first checkpoints on the Iditarod Trail. Once you get away from Anchorage and start going north, it's a checkpoint, and it's a town that used to be it was a World War II runway because we had some runways and some facilities in remote Alaska during World War II, and it got converted into an FAA weather station, which means basically one person who reads the weather from there. And then so there's a post office there. There was a school. I don't think there is anymore, but it doesn't matter because within the area of I don't know, 500 square miles. Well, no. I would say 100 square miles. There's probably about 40 or 50 families and no roads. So I'm sorry about all that barking.
That's all right. Animals are part of the show. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. They're going off about something. But anyway, so I had a friend of mine who his family was really into D&D, but I'd never heard of it, and my mind was blown. But that was the only D&D book within 100 square miles, and so I got to look at it. But they were pretty protective about it because it was expensive, and I think his dad owned it, and so I really wanted to play, but I really didn't do anything but watch. But as a result of that, I decided, well, if I can't play, I'm too poor to go find anything. I can't get anywhere, so I'll make my own. And I really love science fiction, and so I went about making my own game, and that's how it all started. And the first draft was actually really terrible. It was like 30 pages long, and I didn't know what I was doing. I just kind of saw how they played it, and I knew I wanted to be different. I was sure, very careful not to copy anything from D&D, because I was like, well, I don't want to copy. I want to make something new and interesting. And but the first draft was pretty awful. But I had the fortune of having a few friends that lived within at that time. They were my closest friends, and they were like 5 miles away, and but they were willing to play it, so we played it all winter, and we had a blast. And then I had notes, and then over the summer I refined it and came out with basically a second version of it. And that second version is kind of really what drove I guess the development of it, because my friends really liked that. I ended up taking that version with me wherever I went in the world after that. So when I graduated high school and left Alaska, I went other places with the military, and I always, gamers find each other, and I found a group of gamers, and they were okay to play with it, and then pretty soon they got hooked, and so that's kind of the cycle that repeated wherever I went. And so over that time period of me being in the military, it just kept getting developed and kept getting added to. And that's really how we got to where we are now. Because one of my original game group friends, I'm still in contact with, and he actually gave me kind of like a soft ultimatum. He's like, look, either you publish this thing or, give me the material and I'll transcribe it. And I was like, no, I can't do that. How will I publish it? And he's like, well, self-publishing. And I was like, I really had to think about it. And I was like, well, he's got a point. And I'd had people for years from my gaming groups, a lot of different gaming groups are like, man, you should really publish this. And I was like, no, how am I going to do that? I have no industry connections. But I started looking into self-publishing, and I had done a couple of book covers for an author that was doing self-publishing. So I kind of had understood what was going on. And I just decided to commit to it. And I figured if I don't, I have this stack of materials in a well-tested game that is just going to end up in the attic someday. And it's probably going to get tossed in a dumpster because nobody's going to know what it is, So I thought, well, rather than that, why not actually publish it and put all that experience in testing into a finalized product. And so that's how we got here.
Well, and so let's just maybe back up and talk about the development process of how different is it from those, like, how old were you when you first started designing it?
Oh God, like I think 12 or 13. I was pretty 13. Young.
So
yeah.
From that original document, 36 pages or whatever that you said it was there like kind of big blips of evolution in that process where you, after that initial period that you entered the military?
So from the first version, it was just a D6 system. It used 3D6 and used a single D6 for stat checks and 3D6 for combat. And it sort of stayed that way for a little while, but the biggest, the first evolution was going into the second version of it, because it went from a single, pamphlet basically to 3 separate books. And that was a pretty big jump, because there was a book for me as a GM for the rules, and there was a book for the players so that they could handle player progression, character progression, and buying skills and things like that. And then there was an equipment manual, and I had evolved it into 3 separate books because that's how we were playing it at the table. Because some players wanted to look at equipment and buy equipment, and so they wanted that, and then the other players were concerned about their skills, and I needed to have the rules, and it made sense to have that split into 3 separate volumes for us, because then we weren't having to fight over books. So that was the first big evolution of the game, is going from one single pamphlet to 3 separate defined books. And then I would say after that, I had kind of, I was fascinated by polyhedral dice, but I was kind of avoiding them because at the time, they were kind of a luxury, and I had sort of raided my parents' Yahtzee set to get my dice. So I was trying to keep everything with D6s. And when I got to Europe, a gaming group there, they had played, they were a bunch of pretty experienced gamers, and they're like, why don't you just do percentile dice? And I was like, I was against it, right? And I was like, no, it's only D6. And I had worked out conversion tables for percentiles using 3D6 and stuff, but it just never worked out right. And then I think one of my gaming group gifted me a set of percentile dice, and I was like, fine. And so all skills, all skills and ability checks switched over to percentile, and it made the game so much easier for me as a GM. And so that was a second really big evolution of the game, is going from trying to, instead of trying to handle everything with these sixes, pushing the skill checks over to percentiles just made a lot of sense, and it just streamlined a whole lot of things. So that was,
you didn't have those dice at the beginning, right? So
I did not
had on hand, right? You got to work with what you have.
Well, and funny enough, like, it wasn't just that. It wasn't just because I didn't have them. The Satanic Panic was in full swing as well, and so having polyhedral dice was considered to be the mark of the beast or something. And so I avoided them because I didn't want to get I didn't want to stop playing. And so I guess in my mind, as long as I was using D6, it was safe, as a kid. Turns out that my parents really didn't care, and so, like, I had all this anxiety over nothing. But it certainly was a little bit of satanic panic going on, though, even in my remote neighborhood. So but yeah, so I didn't have the dice to begin with, and I was worried about the stigma of using polyhedrals, but I love polyhedrals, and this game uses all of them. So
And then when you first entered the military, I mean, I've had friends that have, like, Canadian military, so different than US. We Canadians do not see as much action as the US military, but I've heard other people that have played in the military, and, like, you develop a lot of cohesiveness, and then you have a lot of downtime and so it's a nice activity that it's pencil and paper, and it's some dice, so that you can actually do something that's creative and a little bit of escapism as you're stationed. So how did that, like, just tell us what would be a day in the life of yourself in the military, and playing and squeezing it in, and how does that work?
So when you're not deployed, it's fairly easy. And, we did what I think a lot of gamers around that age do, because, I was like 19 at that time, so, like, in my 20s, that area, if I wasn't deployed, we would do our work week, which in the military, that's extensive, so it's long hours. And we might play on a work night, but come Friday night, we would play from Friday until Sunday afternoon, and we would just, order pizza and drink sodas and stuff, and so it was just like a one long game session, and that was our weekend. But during deployments, it gets really hard because you really don't have downtime, and so what we would end up doing, because part of my game group deployed with me, and part of them were from another unit, so we didn't get to play until the end of the deployment, when we all ran into each other. But during deployment, so we would just kind of work it in. And one of the beauties of having a role-playing game is that you're right, you just need some dice, and you need a pencil and some paper, and that's about it. Now, I'm lucky because I created the game, I have a thorough understanding of the rules, and so a lot of times it would end up being like one-on-one role playing with another player if we were on guard duty or something. In guard duty, you got to keep your eyes up and on the horizon, and make sure nobody's coming. But so we would be doing that, but at the same time, we would have our dice, and we'd be playing the game. And so I remember one time in particular, we were on an hour guard shift, and we were going through this intense encounter, and our relief came twice, and we sent them away. and because we weren't done with it, and they're like, you don't want to come off of guard duty? No, we're busy, and so we spent like 3 hours, resolving this encounter, and it turned out to be really epic. But that was the only way that we could get through it, was to stay on guard duty. Because if we'd gone back to the tents, we would probably get tasked with something else. And so like, staying on guard duty at that time was the best option. But yeah, we just kind of fit it in where we could get it in. And whenever we got a few moments of downtime, try and play a little bit. There's a lot of character making going on because you can do that independently. So my players would be making characters and stuff, and show up, like we'd go in passing, like, hey, I made this character, and check it out. So you do what you can.
How did the military and your experience in the military inform the game, as far as like the equipment and the tactics and all those types of things?
Well, I think that because you don't want anything to be like true to life, in the sense of like I don't want to make a game that dark, because 6083's tone it's lightly humorous. It's not meant to be super serious, but so there's military humor that's hidden all over it. But I think that how the military culture affected me in my training is that I learned how things actually work. So for my first job, I was a co-pilot in helicopters. So I got to learn how aviation works and how vehicles work in that way, and that kind of informed how vehicle to vehicle combat worked. And so that's sort of helped that development out a lot. And then I would say, as far as like weaponry and tactics, that I infused a lot of what I learned into, I gamified it, if that makes sense. So anybody who's playing combat in 6083 is not necessarily going to equate it like, oh, this is just like combat, but it does run a lot quicker in scene than a lot of other games. And there's a lot of specific, you have to make decisions on the fly quickly, and you have to commit to actions sometimes before you understand what the result of your last actions might be. And I think that that's a direct result of being deployed and being in those kind of situations, is that you don't often have a lot of information feedback like right away. So if you're firing your weapon, you might not know what the results of that weapon, you might not know what happened for a little bit. And I think that the game's combat system kind of reflects that. And then I think that the third part is that there's a certain amount of like humor in military culture, and there's certain ways that people talk and the way that they see things. And I think that if you look in a lot of the quotes, you'd see that reflected in those quotes. So while the quotes are generally not attributed to any one person, it'll just be a quote underneath a piece of equipment. That is, even though it's science fiction and set in the future, these are the kind of things that you might hear soldiers saying about equipment nowadays. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And maybe this is a good time now to just talk about the name 6083 and just talk about your game world and like the setting itself, and how did you come up with the name 6083?
Well, the original name of the game was 6000 AD, but then when I got I got a games magazine back in the 80s, and I saw an ad for a game that was I forget what it was. It was either a Warhammer game or something. It was something AD, and I was like, well, that's gone. I can't use that anymore. Because in the back of my mind, I always had the idea that maybe someday I might publish this thing. It was like wishful thinking. And I was like, well, I really need to be different in that way. So I changed the name to Guardians. And it was Guardians since 85. And when I went to publish a game, I did a thorough search of game names, and I found out that Guardians is taken. It's actually a superhero game, and I don't know who publishes it, but it's been established for several years. And it's like, well, Guardians is out. I can't use that now. So I kind of went back and forth on a couple things, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to pay homage to the year that this was created, 1983. The game is set in the 6000s. And so I was like, well, I'll just change it to 6083. It still sounds like 6000 AD, phonetically, but it pays homage to the year that it was created, and it kind of rolls off the tongue really easily. So I was like, well, you know what? That feels right. And so that's how come it became 6083.
And it is in your notes, you had mentioned it's like Aliens or Starship Troopers or any of those like kind of, bug hunt kind of things. But just tell us about the world and like the aliens and the politics and that sort of thing.
Okay, so in a nutshell, I'll try and be succinct as possible. So it's 6083 when players start playing, and the galaxy, which is actually known as Gargantua, but it's our galaxy, it's the Milky Way. Terran's Earth had been sequestered away from the rest of the galaxy for many, many thousands of years because it had the Sol system, our solar system, had been the site of an interstellar war, and it was considered to be toxic, and so it was sort of just abandoned. And in the meantime, Terrans, we came back, and eventually we ran into other aliens. And once we had run into other aliens, the galaxy realized, like, oh, well, I guess it's not uninhabited over there. And so we became part of the galactic community. But there was another big war that threatened to tear the galaxy apart, and the Terrans were a key part of defeating that threat. But in the aftermath of that, the galaxy is kind of divided into a couple different, like 3 different factions. The 2 main factions are the Central Alliance of Planets, which are the good guys. And then there's the GU, the Galactic Union, which was the old leadership when the war got started. But they're not so much bad guys as they have different goals, and there's some animosity in between those 2 political groups. And then you have the Ritaxians who support the Barada, which are the Barada are they're kind of mysterious. They were bent on destroying the Galactic Union and the CAP at that time, but they've been kind of pushed back into their own territory. The Ritaxians supported them, and so there is those that a lot ally with those factions. So that's kind of the state of the galaxy. Is you have these large factions in the game. You have the run of the whole galaxy, but that's kind of where it sits. And you, as a character, belong to a elite organization called CAPSOG, or just MC, Mission Control, that fills the purpose of, they're kind of like the UN, but a little bit more specialized and a lot more elite. So they're peacekeepers, they do search and rescue, they do humanitarian efforts, they also do combat patrols. They basically do the things that the government of the CAP can't do for political reasons. So, and it's not just black ops stuff. It's more like that a small team of guardians is what they're called. There's still that holdover from the second iteration of the name. There's places where guardians are accepted because of their reputation, that they may be able to go to, and they may be accepted there and be able to execute their mission, whereas CAP military forces would be, they'd be prohibited from. So you fill that niche, but you are chronically overworked, understaffed, and outnumbered every day. And that's where you leave your that's where you start with your characters.
In the character creation, you've got a lot of detail to it, and there's no classes. It's just like building up the character that you want to make. Can you maybe just run us through the process of the attributes and just the base mechanics, just so that people can get a understanding? And with that said, you've often, in your notes, you've mentioned it's pretty crunchy, but with that crunch, it's also very easy to use mechanic.
Well, it is, and I think that that's been one of the biggest questions from people that have seen the game, because the core rules, if you just wanted to play the game, you could use the quick start rules. They're only 13 pages long. That's the guts of the game. The rest of the game, the rest of what's there is there to support that, as far as additional rules, lore, equipment, things like that. But backing up to what you asked about, so character creation, well, the attributes are kind of a funny thing, because you get your ability scores, and they're different. They're not the standard ability scores that you're used to. I remember when I first made the game, I was dead set on not emulating D&D, but I had no idea what those scores were. I knew what they were called, but I didn't want to emulate them. And so we started, I think, with just like 4 or 5 ability scores. And then it was like mental, vision, and hearing. And then I think balance and coordination and physical fitness. And then hit rank was their combat ability. But then as we played, we realized, I realized, okay, I have need of other ability scores that do specific things. And so things started to get added into the game. And so that's kind of why a character sheet looks the way that it does with those ability scores. And it's a roll under system for your anytime you're trying to accomplish a task. It's roll under, it's percentile, and it's based off of your ability score, and then that is modified if you have additional skills in whatever it is you're trying to do. So let's say if you're trying to pilot, and that's based off of your balance and coordination. Coordination is the key word there. So you'd use your base percentile from your BC, and then you would add any modifiers due to any piloting skills that you might have. And so that's how the system works in a nutshell. It's really simple. Combat's a little more complex. We can get into that later if you want, but it is a different thing for sure. But as far as character creation, no, there's no classes. You do have professions, and what they are for is those professions are basically stepping stones. They're to get you started. And the way that the character creation is designed, it's designed to mitigate choice paralysis. So you have your scores, and what your scores are dictates what you're qualified for. So you might be qualified for, maybe you're only qualified for 6 or 7 of those professions, and then you can kind of look through those and say which ones that you want. You're not faced with a whole bunch of professions, and you have to decide what you want. You're kind of funneled into a band of professions, and then you can choose from those. So your classification, you roll your dice, you roll your attributes, your ability scores, then you add your classification, which classification is the blanket noun for species or race or any of that. And I came up with that in '85 because I didn't want to use race at that time. I don't remember why, but I just thought, well, classifications is a nice blanket term because it covers everybody. Because we've got synthetics too. We've got robots and we've got androids and things like that. So, but your classification bonuses determine some more bonuses to your initial ability scores, and then you take that into your professions and see what you can qualify for, and then that gets you your profession, which gives you more bonuses and maybe some special skills, and then you're ready to play. But if you wanted to move to a different profession, you can do that. if you wanted to save up your training points and try for one of the elite professions, which are kind of arcane in nature, you could do that too. It's all based around player choice. You could literally make whatever kind of character you want. It's there for you. It just gives you a place to start. That's what character creation does.
And when I first met you, I think it was on my Discord channel,
Mhm.
and you shared your initial drafts. And I don't think they were, maybe they were just, or they were heading to DriveThruRPG. And I remember you asking for feedback, and I started looking at it, and my initial gut reaction, I think I mentioned this to you in my comments, was like, oh, well, we need to OSR this thing up, right? We got to modernize it. And within 8 pages, I was like, I wouldn't change a thing. Like that was like, it was kind of like, it had a certain charm of like, it really is what it's meant to be. And I was like, yeah, like, so that was actually a kind of a light bulb moment, and it made me go, hey, I'd like to have you on the show at some point just to talk about that, of like, trends and what we would probably consider, like, if you were to design a game today with like an OSR viewpoint and like modern everything, modern rule sets, simplistic rule sets and everything. But as I went through it, I kept going, no, this game has an aesthetic and a charm to it, and the rules and just reinforce that. And based upon that too is your fine arts that we see, some of them in the background of your studio there, I'm assuming. And just maybe tell us about how you've done the layout and the art and over all these years. Was it more of a recent thing that you added the art to it, or was there always that art?
So, because of art, speaking about the art, because I've been playing this game so long, and it's kind of in my subconscious and like everything that I do, and that might be kind of weird, but what I find is that even because I'm an artist by trade, I guess I'm this by trade now though, actually, because I'm doing this more now. But a lot of the art that I created in the past, I created with this sort of aesthetic in mind, because in no small way that I myself have kind of fallen in love with this universe. And so a lot of the art that I create does have aspects of the game in it, for good or for bad. The cover of the book is interesting because this piece behind me here it's called Jupiter, or not Jupiter Ascending. It's called Saturn Rising, and it features a character from the game. But it was designed for an art exhibition, but it features a character from the game. And so when I committed to putting them into print, I was like, well, I need a cover image. And I was like, well, this is Captain Antwi. I'm going to put her on the cover, and for now, and then I'll change it later, when I have time. But at this point, this is the image that's associated with the game, and this has become the cover. So, and I'm fine with that. I like the painting, and it's representative of the game too, so it's fine. But so the art that's in the game, a lot of it was done before, and I either just touched it up a little bit, or in some cases with the older work, because there was some stuff that was just line drawings from the 80s, and I took those into Photoshop and prettied them up and put them in there. I didn't change them so much that original players wouldn't recognize them though, because I wanted them still to be recognizable. And a lot of the other work that's in there, a lot of that is just digital. And I've been working over the last 2 years to, transcribe equipment illustrations and things like that. A lot of those illustrations from like the Alliance market, like their old versions are definitely recognizable. Like they're the same models. They're just prettier versions of it now that I've done in Photoshop. But that was a 2-year process getting all the art in. And it was really important for me not to use stock art. I wanted to make sure that everything that was in the game is representative of the universe, because as a player, when you're looking through a game, like I don't want to be, me personally, like this is just my opinion, I want to see stuff that has to do with the game specifically. I want to be able to point at it and say, okay, this is from the game. And as a creator, when somebody sees the art, I want people to say, oh, okay, I can see that this is from 6083 because of these reasons. You know, maybe it's the gear that they're wearing or whatever. But it was really important for me to have that specificity as far as illustration, make sure that it was a true representation of the game world and not just stock art thrown in there. I'm lucky in that regard because I'm an artist. And so I have the ability to do that. And not everybody can do that because art is expensive. So I recognize that I'm really, really lucky in that regard. And yeah.
It also reinforces the fact that like this is a one person creation. And I really appreciate that as far as like, you know, almost 40 years you've been developing this and your art is in it and it's your voice in it and your world in it. And I'm not to disparage or like dilute the impact that players have probably had like over the years, play testers and that sort of thing. But you've really, this is your life's work in a sense. Do you ever kind of take a step back and think about it like that? Like you mentioned at the beginning, you didn't want this to be in the attic and get thrown out one day.
Well, I do, and I don't mean to get heavy for a moment or dark, but I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, you know, I'm 53, you know, I've still got a lot of years left, you know, hopefully, right? But you know, and I was in the military for 21 years of active duty, and so you know, I've got awards from the military and medals and things like that, but they're abstract. So like even to my kids, like you know, they know about my medals and I'm sure that they're proud of me, but it's all abstract. It's not anything that they can touch. And, you know, and I'm an artist and I've created a lot of art and that's cool, but it's not really out in the world in the same way. And I was thinking about it. It's like, what is my legacy to my kids? And when I was thinking about the game, I was like, well, this is nearly 40 years of development. And this is something that I can pass on to them. And it's something that they can hold in their hands and say, this is something that dad did. And that's relatable. And so, yeah, I have thought about that in a way, you know, regardless of the other things that I've done in my life, that this is a reflection of my life in many ways. And it is my legacy. So.
And it's been well received. I know lots of people have commented upon it that there's something about it that just resonates with them. And just, can you talk to us like about, I mean, it's always a little bit nerve wracking to hit like publish on DriveThruRPG.
Oh yeah, it is.
And release it out into the world. How's it been received?
It's been received well, but it's always hard to gauge that because I get some direct feedback, but not proportionally. Like right now, last time I checked on DriveThruRPG, I've had about 3,000 downloads of the product. And that's one or all of the things together. But the actual feedback I get from that is not commensurate with the amount. You know what I mean? It's something like 2 or 3% of people getting back to me. So it's hard to say how it's being received other than what I do get in feedback is very positive. So, and I'm very appreciative of that. So it's hard to say. It's something that I know that in this industry that this is a long game. It's sometimes I think that publishers get lucky and they hit something right away. But I think that in most cases, I think product has to be around for a little bit for it to really gain a foothold and a voice in the community. And that's the waiting is the hardest part, right?
And so you've got it broken down into, there's the player's manual, the GM's manual, and then the Alliance Market, which has a lot of the equipment in it. And you've made a commitment that the PDFs will always be free. And maybe just talk to us about that, because I know that it hits home for you why you chose that. So
this goes back to why 6083 was created in the first place, is because I was too poor to afford anything. Like I was dirt poor. And I thought a lot about how I was going to publish this, and I settled on print on demand as opposed to a Kickstarter. I might do a Kickstarter in the future, but I didn't do a Kickstarter for two reasons. Well, one, outside of my original player base, which is like, I don't know, like 100 and some people, like who else is going to contribute to that, because it's an unknown property, so I didn't want to fail a Kickstarter. Because to publish, you need at a minimum, if you want to do like a print run, you need like something like $20,000 or $30,000. And it's like, well, but the other part of the Kickstarter is paying for like layout and artists, and I'm doing all of that. So I thought, well, it seems a little bit disingenuous of me to ask for money for something that I'm already doing. I will publish the product, and then when there is a printed option, if people want to give back that way, then they can buy the printed versions, and and there we go. But the reason why that I've always committed, why I've made that commitment for it to be free, is because we do live in a society right now where maybe a lot of people aren't as poor as I was when I was a kid, but it was definitely a barrier to gaming. Like in order to game, I had to literally raid a Yahtzee set and create my own rules. And I thought, well, there might be other kids out there, or just people in general, that want to play a sci-fi game but can't, because the barrier for entry is too high. Most PDFs, cost around $20. And I was like, well, I want to give back. And so the PDFs that you can download, they're black and white. They're optimized for web viewing and for printing if you're going to print them out. So they're not as fancy. They don't have all the illustrations. But it is a complete game. And I just thought, well, that would be a really nice way to give back. And let's be honest, I think that with most properties, there's a portion of people, not everybody, that are going to pass on a PDF that they have anyway. And so it's really hard to control something like that. And I think, well, as opposed to forcing a moral quandary onto someone, whether they should or shouldn't share this PDF, I'll just make it free for everybody. And then that way there's no moral issues, and anybody who wants to play a game, they can play it, and they got everything that they need right there. And I think that for me, that just felt like the right thing to do. And that's why I made that decision.
And you've recently now, I think just within the last month or so, started doing the print on demand version of them. And what was it like to get that first test copy to you?
Oh, it was amazing. Unfortunately, it had errors in it. Like, not so much like punctuation and things like that, but formatting errors. And so I had to go back and like fix some things. I just received my hard copies for the hardbacks of the game. They're proofs.
But I think hold that up again so everybody can see at home.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the hardback, which is going to be available very soon. But there's a formatting issue in it. But the issue, I think, is at the printer, and I'm waiting for feedback, because my softcover versions, they're all available right now, and they're exactly the way that I want them. The interior files are the same. For some reason, the interior files on the hardcover, there's some cropping issues, and I need to find out if that's at the printer or if that's something to do with me. So if it's at the printer, then I'll reorder it, send another set of proofs, and then the hard copies will be available as soon as I can give them thumbs up to say go ahead and make those listings live. So.
But that must have been exciting. Like I said, it's almost 40 years that you've been kind of developing this game, and through different iterations of it and expanding upon it, to actually have that print version, even if it was the soft cover version, in your hand. Was that kind of a bit of a milestone for you?
It was an amazing moment. And every time that I get, and it still is, every time that I open the books, because when I was a kid, you think about, you had a lot of dreams. And this was always one of my dreams, to publish the game. But I never thought I could do it because, at that time, TSR was dominating, and there was Games Workshop, and, there was a couple other of I think Palladium, but it doesn't matter. Like I didn't have connections to any of those, and I was like, there's no way that somebody like me, way out in the middle of Alaska, is ever going to be able to publish these. So, it remained a pipe dream for me, but it was a dream. Like I used to think it would be awesome. Those original manuals are written in the manner that a book would be written, even if they were written terribly. But they were written instructively, like a game manual is supposed to be written. So they weren't just like rules, scribbled down for me. They were written carefully and with the voice of teaching someone to play the game. And so I always had it in my head, but it just never thought it would come to pass. But it did. And getting to open the box that first time was a dream come true. It was a really amazing feeling to actually hold it in my hands. And then to be able, it's also vindicating and validating too, because I also, have the game out here locally in Flagstaff, and I have a local game group. And, when someone says, like, oh, hey, I'd like to play this game. What is it, a homebrew? And it's a really different thing to be able to produce professionally, um, professionally produced manuals and say, yeah, it's sort of, but no, it's just an independent game because it changes their perception of it. It authenticates it. And I think that for me, that's been a really, really great moment is every time that I have a new player who kind of, they don't know what to think about me or this idea of a new sci-fi game. But as soon as they get the manual in their hands, and they get excited about it, it's like opening that first box all over again for me. It's that moment of discovery and that feeling of like, well, no matter what happens with the game, I made it happen, and it's a beautiful feeling to be able to fulfill one's own one's own dreams. So, yeah, it's amazing.
Well, that's cool, and I'm very happy to share your story because I think it's one that I've heard the saying, Einstein, and how many Einsteins have we lost in the mines over the years that like had these visions or books. And I think I recently saw there's a video on somebody that won the Pulitzer Prize posthumously because the mother insisted upon trying to get it published, and it after his death, like 8 years after, and he won it. So I'm very glad that you were able to bring this out to the world. And what's the next steps for the game? And like, are there adventures coming? You mentioned maybe a Kickstarter in the future. Do you have any kind of inclinations where it's heading?
I do, and I want to circle back around to another thing that you asked about because I think it's important. But I'm going to answer your question first. So the future is that yes, there is adventures. Right now, there is one adventure out called the Lost Patrol. I am currently working on a second adventure, The Signal. These two adventures are free to download. And then any adventures after that, they'll be monetized. But and then also all of them have print on demand options as well. But the plan is to continue to support the game as long as possible, and for me that means the rest of my life, honestly. So I have no intention of moving on to a different system or publishing anything else. This has been, my baby for the last, 40 years. It will continue to be my main focus. So in the future, I did mention a Kickstarter. My wife and I had talked about if in the future maybe doing a anniversary edition of the game that's stitched binding instead of glued for those that want it. So if we're able to do that, we will. We might also do a Kickstarter for the expansion because this is the core game with all the stuff that has been in it, but there are some things that I've held back because maybe they're a little bit more, I'm not going to say advanced. It's just maybe it'd be better for a more experienced GM to have that kind of material. So the expansion will include additional enemy factions, more equipment, and some more character profession options, and some more character classification options. It's just going to expand the game more to give you more options for the things that you're already doing. So but it's not going to. That's one of my other precepts, is that I really dislike, just my opinion, additions. In that I don't like it when a game gets revised and then it makes the previous editions obsolete. I think that's, in my opinion, that's predatory, and I think it upsets the players. So the game that you're playing of 6083 now is still going to be the same game that you're playing in the future. You're just going to have additional material to play with. But I'm not going to revamp the rules and put out a second edition. That's not something that's ever going to happen. So, short answer, yes, the game will continue to get expansions. It will continue to get adventures. I'm also working on a campaign style adventure. That one's, I don't know if that one's going to get launched in 2023 or not, because it's pretty long. But as you pointed out, I'm one guy. So I'm doing the best I can, going as fast as I can.
Well, that's great. And I'll have all the links in the show notes to DriveThruRPG, and your website, missioncontrol6083.com, and where they can get the game. And where else there's Instagram. I know you're on TikTok and all those things. We'll have all those in the show notes and then in the video description. But, I just want to say I'm very happy to be able to share your story. I think it's a really incredible one. I think a lot of people probably feel very connected to that, because a lot of us older gamers have probably developed something in the past, and it's nice to see something like this and a good news story come out of it.
Well, to circle around to one of your comments about the game manual, which I really appreciate, that you wouldn't have changed it. The original books, even though they're handwritten, were laid out this way. They were laid out in single column as opposed to two columns, and they're written and organized in a very specific way. And the reason why that I've retained that formatting is to honor the player base. Like, there might only be 100 or so like diehard 6083 fans that have been playing over the years, but this game is kind of a love letter to them and to me, and that's why it is the way that it is. Like, there's certainly some modernization as far as layout or even game mechanics that we could put into it, but I think that would really be betraying what it is. Like, it's successful, it's had the testing, and it is what it is. And I guess either people will love it, or it might not be their cup of tea, but it will remain what it is. And so I appreciate you saying that about the manual, because that's very, very near and dear to me, to keep the formatting the way it is.
Well, Jason, I just want to say, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your story and your game, and wish you all the best in the future.
Gary, it has been an honor. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it so much.